Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Shift with CJ podcast. Today on the podcast, I have someone really special because my guest on the show today wears many hats. He is an author, a public speaker. He's got more than 25 years of experience. That's a hat in itself. Then he also is like works with CEOs, board of directors, bankers, people from the Fortune 500, and a lot of people from like the health and wellness space. And that's what really got my attention because he's just all over the place. He is also a lifelong marathoner and a legal advisor. Saul, welcome to the show.
Thank you, CJ. Great to be talking to you today.
Great to have you here today. I was going to make my first attempt at pronouncing your last name. Tell me, how did I do it? Finkelstein. Finkelstein. Was
Finkelstein,
that
that's
anywhere
it.
close? Finkelstein. Oh, okay, perfect.
Finkelstein is perfect.
Amazing.
You
So
got my
happy to
first.
have
You got my
you,
first
Saul.
name.
So tell me.
You got my first name on the first try, so
Sorry.
that's good. You got my first name on the
Yeah,
first try, so
that wasn't. Yeah, I've had a lot of coffees today. You see, that wasn't very hard. So tell me, Saul, how do you manage all of these things? How have you been doing all the things like being an author, a public speaker? You've had so much of experience in corporate governance, finance, all the all the crazy stuff, mergers, acquisitions, and you've been running marathons and you've got such an interest in health and wellness space. So how do you manage all of this?
well, it didn't start that way. It didn't start with. I came out of
Okay, let's hear
law
your story.
school.
How did it start?
Yeah. Well, I won't take you to every moment of the whole ordeal, but when I
Mhm.
came out of law school, I was pretty much just like anybody else. I was trying to figure out what I was supposed to be doing as a young corporate, um, and that took and certainly a lot longer than I thought it would. In the beginning, I really didn't do very much else other than the lawyer that I could be. But a few years into
Mhm.
that, it seemed to me that there must be more to life than just being good at your profession. That seemed to be the base to start the rest of your life. So if once you have a base in what you're trained to do, then you could start thinking about, well, how could this lead to other things, and what else am I interested in, and what else um, motivates me. So I started running occasionally, which led to me running marathons, um, which led me to having an interest in health and wellness generally, because if you're going to be a lifelong marathon runner, you need to have a long-term plan about your health and wellness. So that led me down many paths of for my on my own personal journey in terms of health and wellness. But one of the things that occurred to me probably about 15 or 18 years ago was that I had gained a fair amount of knowledge and experience just doing my own thing and
Mhm.
being around the fitness world. I started reaching out to people who were starting in the fitness world and seeing if I could share some of my experience and insight with them. So I started working with people who were starting fitness companies in non-traditional spaces. So they weren't just trying to open up the next gym or yoga studio, they were trying to build out different platforms for delivering fitness or to support the fitness industry. And as these things tend to happen, one thing leads to another. You meet people along the way, and I started advising people in startups through their capital raising, through their expansions, um, and that brings me to today, where I continue on my own personal fitness journey in terms of marathons and everything it takes to support that, which is quite a bit. As the years continue, you have to constantly adjust. Through my corporate law practice, which is not all that dissimilar from most corporate lawyers in New York in the sense that I deal with financing and mergers and acquisitions and investment bankers and things like that, to
Mhm.
also advising both on a legal and on a business front companies in the fitness space in terms of strategic direction, key hires, and things like that, as well as legal work.
Interesting. That's a nice outline that you've summarized. Now, when you speak about non-traditional platforms or non-traditional ways of enhancing fitness, which is not your typical yoga studio or a gym, what kind of non-traditional places are we talking about?
So I'll give you a couple of examples. One of the first early ventures that I was affiliated with was a group near Princeton University in New Jersey. And their idea was to be a stop shop of medical and fitness experience, meaning that customers would first have a thorough physical medical examination by a staff of physicians across all modalities and specialties,
Mhm.
which would then prescribe a fitness routine, which would be on the second floor of the building. So you have medical on the first floor. The second floor would be fitness, where the trainers were in communication with the medical side and implementing the medical recommendations in terms of cardio, strength training, stretching, flexibility, whatever was prescribed for. And if that person had serious chronic medical conditions, they were working with people who were trained to work with them in that with those limitations. So
Mhm.
I would say that was a non-traditional way of um, thinking about both medicine and fitness. Usually, those aren't brought that closely together. You see your doctor, you see your trainer, or you go to the gym, and you try to have them mesh, but this was an attempt to do that directly. So that was, I would say, somewhat non-traditional. To
Mhm.
today, I am working with spend quite a bit of time actually with a leading brand in the fitness and wellness space, which the founder developed a uh, mindful way of it's called really mindful fitness, where you're not just exercising for the sake of exercising, but you're constantly being reminded through the instructor how your physical is attached to your mental. So when things become challenging physically, what does that trigger for you emotionally, and what limitations are you uh, consciously or unconsciously putting on yourself in experiencing the physical demands of a workout. So combining the mindfulness and the physical, they developed a method that is at the time that it was developed was fairly unique. Now a lot of people have made that connection, but um, these were not people simply who were slapping exercise videos up on YouTube or putting a subscription wall in front of people to do fairly generic workouts. They had thought of fitness and wellness in different ways and different ways of delivering it to customers.
Interesting. That is very interesting. And honestly, I've been into fitness for the last, not as long as you, but like I've been in fitness for the last 18 years. And a little bit of running. I was never a fan of running, but like a lot of CrossFit, bodybuilding, weightlifting, mixed martial arts. So I've always loved to be in that fitness thing. And for the last almost decade, I used to try to go to the gym. It was sort of like a punishment. You're just going and exercising, and sometimes you don't feel good, but you're still exercising because your awareness or your attention is all around the physical body, and you're only thinking, okay, you know what? How can I look better? How can I perform better? And how can I jump higher, run faster? Name it. Name your modality. And then in the last, say, 5 to 6 years, I've personally changed that approach, and where I now look at the body more holistically, and just not extending it to the physical body, but like you mentioned, the mental body, the energetic body. There's all, and the thing is, we have, most of us have a reductionist approach. So we're always thinking, oh, how can we isolate that next best thing? And okay, if it's body, how can we just focus on the body and let's, that is the whole thing. But when you look at nature and when you look at most of the things in nature, nothing exists in a single isolate. It exists in a complex nature of very interconnected things. And every time you remove one part of that interconnectedness, the whole system kind of, I mean, it can survive, but it's not going to be optimal. So I completely agree with you, and it's such a great thing to know that more and more people, because of either social media or you know uh, health companies, or more science that we can learn about today, or products, we're sort of looking at the bigger picture and seeing how we can incorporate, like, you, life sucks if you have a six pack, but if your hormones are down and you're angry at everyone else. So there has to be sort of that kind of a balance, and I'm happy that you took this approach where you're looking at everything. So tell me, when you're looking at all of these companies, like now you've got like a good interest, you're advising people, you've seen so many things change in the last, I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 26 years. So what are some of the things that you've, and the fitness industry is also, it's like most of the other things, right? You have a trend that comes in. It's like the typical nutrition or the diet industry. One day, someone might be having Actins, and some day will be high carb, low fat, low carb, high fat, high protein. So all of these things have their phases, and some last for some time. Some are really good. So, what are like some of the things that you've seen in the past few years that you thought, or you had this vision that, oh, this is not going to work? Or, and what are might be some of the things that you were like, oh, perfect, this is something that we have to keep our eye on because this might explode in the future? Do you, after so many years, have you developed that kind of an intuition where your gut says like, ah, this is going to be there? Or is it more of your analytical and like mathematical brain? So I just wanted to get your take on that.
Really interesting question, because it's hard not to answer that question without thinking about the effect that the COVID pandemic has had on all of this. Because I think none of us envisioned that people would find it interesting and stimulating to be working out from home. And, Peloton comes along as an example. And, so you buy this bike and basically you could live your fitness life through our platform, and you could do that all from the comfort of your home. When that concept first rolled out, I have to admit that I didn't think that that was going to be attainable, because I thought that people would, when in out of necessity, would do that. If the gyms are closed and you're basically confined to your home and you still want to work out, yes, that would be a good alternative. But when things went closer back to normal, which was sort of where we are now, I always thought that people need community, and there are online communities, um, and these brands try to create community through their online platforms, but there's really no substitute for in-person communities. So um, I think so you're talking about trends. I think there is a place in the fitness world for online um, platforms to deliver um, their product that way. But I also think that the people who can go beyond that, the brands who can go beyond just a digital world into a in-person world as well. In particular, in the context of this environment where we are in terms of pandemic, in terms of the economy, in terms of all the upheaval in the world, that's really going to be sustainable. So, unfortunately, and I think this might be more true in fitness than in maybe some other industries, there are a lot of people out there who are looking to glob on to the next trend and ride it for as long as they can. And when it peters out, then they'll go on to something else. And there are not a lot of people who are thinking about the long term and how do I build something that is going to be sustainable through all the variants and trends that come out, and so you see a lot of brands that come and go. I don't want to get too specific, but
Yeah.
certainly this is not a brand that came and went, but it's a brand that I think has peaked for a variety of reasons, like Soul Cycle. 5 years ago, that was the hottest thing around. I think that the pandemic did a lot to undermine it, but people move on. People get tired of whatever that new thing is. And so the thing that interests me most, and the thing that I look for and try to advise fitness companies on, is trying to build something that goes beyond the trend, something that you look deeply into why people start exercising and then stop, which is what most people do. People, particularly around the beginning of the new year, they'll get committed for 2 or 3 weeks, and then they'll stop, and then maybe someplace along the year they'll pick up again briefly. But what really interests me is, why is it that people can't maintain that same enthusiasm that they have on January 1st on February 1st? And I think the companies and brands that can unlock that secret and make exercise something more sustainable for the average person, I think that's the key to the next wave of success in the fitness industry. And I think you have to start by thinking of what is missing from most fitness platforms today that don't keep people engaged over the long term. And I think some of these companies believe that their attrition is acceptable because there are always more people out there to replace the people that leave. So they're not particularly. Everybody wants to have high, very low, very high retention rate. They don't want to have a lot of turnover, but I don't think they build their long term. That people that will start exercising on January 1st will still be around on October 1st and November 1st. Because they're trying to find a trend as opposed to trying to find a solution.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And yeah, 100% agree that most of the people, it's a very deeper why. It's we're all biochemically individual. We're all have a different sort of like culture comes in, where you were grown comes in, like challenges comes in. So there's like a big mix. But I would say that if someone could unlock that, that would be the next best thing. And if you're listening to this podcast and Saul just gave you a great idea to make the next big thing, so take some time and think over it. Think of how you can do this in the long term, solve a real problem, add real value, and really change the dynamics. Think about the long term, guys. Now, you've done 26. Am I right? It's 26 marathons?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So first, what is a lifelong marathoner? Does that mean that for the entire for from now or the last 26 years you're committed to do a marathon every year, or something along those lines?
Something along those lines. So it's not as if it's a guarantee, right? Because
Mhm.
there's so many variables that go into making it to the starting line. So I try not to be presumptuous with myself and say that, okay, I just finished the marathon, and then I know that in 365 days from now, I'm going to be in the starting line again. I strive to get there, but I don't make any assumptions that I will. And for the most part, I've made it. I ran my first marathon in 1988. And I missed a few years. My second son was born very close to time when it was deep into marathon training. So I decided that was not a good year to be running a marathon. And there were other times where I actually just didn't feel like it. Didn't feel motivated enough to do it. But I haven't done the math, but however many years 1988 was from now, and you put in 26 annual marathons during the course of that, it comes out to pretty close to most years. And when I say lifelong marathoner, I mean that my motivation for doing it is to run, feel good about how I'm running, to hopefully not slow down too much from year to year, although that's somewhat inevitable, but to come into marathon training with a base of fitness that allows me to proceed with the training without getting injured. So most of the people that I ran marathons with in the 90s not only are not running marathons today, they're not running at all because they pushed themselves too much. They came into training without a strong enough base. They tried to do more marathons than their body really wanted them to do. So you know, I knew a lot of people who would do several marathons a year, and to me that just didn't seem sustainable. That you're constantly in this state of intense training, constantly in the state of putting stress onto your body, and it seemed that that was not something that was going to make a marathoner. So I've kept it to no more than one a year, and I do a lot of things during the course of the year to get me ready for it. So it's not where I have to turn the switch on and to start training. It's I've already been in that mode. I've already done a lot of things to get to that point where I could start running training runs of 15 miles and 20 miles without hurting myself or without putting stress on my body that it's not used to taking. So it's looking at things from the long-term perspective, and it's looking at things from a perspective of how do I keep myself uh, in the best position to start training when the time comes during the year.
Mhm. One of the most interesting things that I heard you say is about your friends who ran marathons with you earlier, and now they were, pushing it too much. And personally, whenever I meet people and they tell me that, hey, I'm having some issues, like, it could be shin splints or stress fracture, or like when they get into more details, like got some runner's knee, Achilles tendonitis, things like that. My first question to them is, how long have you been running, or how much have you been running? So injuries, and I think there was a stat that said 79% of all people who start running in their first year, they get injured. And some of these injuries can be more complex, and this is one reason why people don't last running so much, because of injuries. And again, we're still, as a society, we haven't accepted that, like, let's say for this intense a marathon, like running a marathon is so much more than just running that marathon, right? Like you mentioned, you've got to prepare for it. You need to see what kind of structural imbalances do you have or not. You have to see what kind of volume of training that you're using. Is it segmented, is it sequential? There are so many other aspects to it for you to not just burn out the tank. And on top of that, we're it's it's like, nutrition, health, recovery, resilience, all of these things interplay. So do you have a after all these years, do you have a coach or a mentor that you sort of like get your programs through, or do you design them yourself? Like, what's your approach? Because it is complex.
It is complex, and I do a lot of reading in the area. I've read, lots of books on marathon training, lots of programs. My son, who's now 31, is going to be running the New York Marathon with me this year, and he's just discovering a lot of these things that I've been looking at and reading for a long time. And I would say almost every day we have a conversation. We had a conversation yesterday about marathon training and how he was reading where your long runs should be at least a minute per mile slower than your marathon pace. And we had a whole discussion about how does that actually work. If you've been training at say a 9-minute mile pace, and you want to do the marathon at an 8-minute mile pace, and you're only training up to 20 miles, which is what's usually recommended by most training experts, how do you find that extra minute per mile and add another 6 miles on top of that in something
Mhm.
that you've never done before? So um, it's just an example, sort of the common wisdom about marathon training, and then kind of analyzing and see what works for me. I know that particularly worked for me. That I find that exercise is very specific, meaning that if you want to run a mile in 7 minutes, you should run a mile in 7 minutes as often as you can, and that's the best way to do it. So if you want to run a marathon at a 8 minute per mile pace, you should probably be running your 20-mile runs at close to that. Not every single one, but you should have a few so that you have experience. So finding that kind of training method that works for you, but also all the other things that you mentioned, that nutrition throughout the year, so that your body weight is at an optimal level for your training. And that means different things to different people. Some people have to be super lean. Some people need more mass in order to do that. Balance and flexibility. So a great example of this kind of thing just happened to me last year. So I was scheduled to run the New York Marathon in November of 2021. And I did my usual training of long base mileage and balance and flexibility training and everything else, and weight training for upper body strength. And I came through it fine. And we were down to the last few days before the marathon, and all of a sudden my left knee started bothering me. And I said, oh, I've felt this before. It doesn't seem unusual. And another day or two went by. Now we're 2 days before the marathon, and it really was hurting, and I was having trouble walking. And it's like, this doesn't. I can't run the marathon with this. This doesn't feel right. And make a long story short, there was nothing really wrong with my knee beyond the fact that I had imbalances in my muscular system. So my glutes and my hips were not strong enough to sustain a structure where there was not putting undue pressure on my knee. So through physical therapy, we worked on those things, and I've been pain-free ever since. So here it was. I've been running marathons for decades, more or less doing the same thing for the last 10 or 15 years without any problem. And then a light goes on, 2 days before the marathon, saying there's something wrong that you're not even aware of. So I had no idea that I had this imbalance. It never came up anywhere else. But when I went to physical therapy the first time, and the physical therapist asked me to do certain things which I couldn't do, and they said, well, that's because you have weakness in this area. And I actually had never, worked on those things. So it's, every person's body is different and needs different things, but I think we all have, different alignment and strength. They will come to the fore if you don't address them. At some point, they will come and address you, which happened to me. And I think a lot of people will come to a situation like that where, okay, my knee really hurts. I should take off 3 months, and my knee will get better, and then I'll start running again. And you're not the issue is not necessarily that you're putting too much stress on it. The issue is that your body is not doesn't have the strength and balance to sustain that stress. So
that's a very good example.
Yeah, you never quite get to the. I mean, I probably have imbalances now that I'm not aware of that may come up and raise their hand and make me pay attention to them at some point. But I think that if you try to address strength and flexibility in all parts of your body, from the neck down to the feet, you're going to be able to stave off most of these chronic injuries. Look, there are people who they're just not built for running marathons, and that's obviously totally okay, because they're just the way their body is put together. So I wouldn't suggest that you try to fit a round peg into a square hole and say, even though I have these issues, I'm still going to, run marathons year after year. And that it just may not be for everybody. But I would suspect, though, that there is some kind of workout that is sustainable over the long term for most people. And it's a question of combining your interest with your capability. So if you're interested in swimming and your body is aligned for that, then you found, your example. I think in my case, distance running is what my body was capable of being accomplishing through uh, all the things that I talked about,
So
and that's my sweet spot.
so interesting, and like this is such a good thing for everyone who's listening to note down. Is looking at Saul's example there, he's used the example of a marathon and running, but you can apply this to your life as well. Like if you wanted to be successful at anything, whether it's, starting a new business or, going for a marathon or doing something else, then you could do a good job or an okay job if you're looking for something average, but every time you want to go beyond average, there are multiple things that you probably don't know about, and if you think you know everything, then that's just your ego speaking. And that's the time that you start looking for more information, any information that can help you, whether look for a mentor or look at a book like Saul did, or talk to someone who's running with you, or a doctor or a physician. And when something hurts or something isn't right, like we mentioned earlier, it's not an individualized approach that you can just, I'll let my knee go and it'll be fine. No, we're talking about systems biology. We're talking about a holistic integration of systems biology, which means that if something is wrong, then there are multiple things. Is the iceberg effect, all? You can only see the tip of the iceberg, but there are so many things that can be going down. So, and that's a good time where you don't ask your best friend about it, but talk to someone or read something, or raise up your hands. This is what I tell everyone: every time you're stuck, raise your hand, ask for help, and help will come some way or the form, but you've got to do it. And we're talking about nutrition now. If my math isn't great, but like when you look at the average statistics, you could build, depending on the person's size and the body and the speed, about like 100 calories or so per mile. And if you're looking at a typical marathon, you guys have in miles, 26 something, 26.2 miles. That means you're burning averagely about 2,600 calories. And that's for for average people, it's more than the daily intake of the calories for men and for women. So what's your secret? Because if you're eating all the time, then you have gastric distress and then you can't perform that well, you feel heavy. So walk me through your sort of a nutrition approach. And we also know that in a lot of these things, pure nutrition, because we weren't made to run 26.2 miles, right? So we weren't meant to do that all the time. So sometimes when you want to accelerate this process, you bring in tech, you bring in supplements, you bring in some other things. So talk to me about like what are you adding to increase your performance? That's it.
Yeah, the other part of that is hydration as well. But
Mhm.
looking at nutrition as a whole, um, I think that carbohydrates become very important when you're mileage, and there are better carbohydrates than others. I think complex carbohydrates are better than simple carbohydrates. So fruits and vegetables and whole grains and things like that I find are very helpful. But during the actual day of the marathon, that is a challenge that continues to challenge me in terms of finding the way to at least maintain enough nutrition during the course of the marathon day and hydration that you're not doing so much that you're in a state of gastric distress like you describe, and not so little that you're really drained. So I'll give you an example of that. The first marathon that I ran in 1988, I decided without consulting with anybody, but just through my own talking to myself, is that a good way to save time in running the marathon is not stopping to drink any water. So I'm going to save at least 10 minutes by not stopping to drink any water. And so that meant that I drank almost no water during the 26 miles. And I luckily had no long-term damage from that. And but I do remember finishing it feeling completely drained. Um, and and how later that day I was just in a state of depletion. Not medically, but I just couldn't eat and drink enough. And by the next day or two, I was fine. But the idea of taking enough in during the course of the marathon that you're at least maintaining a level of hydration that allows you to get to the next mile without weighing you down. And I use these gels. There are
Mhm.
lots of them. I happen to like the ones without caffeine because I don't react well to caffeine. If I have any caffeine, I seem to be up for days after that. So I take the non-caffeinated one, and there's some carbohydrates in there. There's some sugars. There's some amino acids in there, and I think each pack has about 100 calories, and I usually go through about 8 of those. Between that and getting a good carb-based meal the night before, it straddles the line of getting you just enough to get to power you and fuel you through the marathon. But one of the fun things about running the marathon is that when you first finish, you don't have any appetite whatsoever. That you couldn't even think about food. And so you try to eat, you have a or a half of a bagel or something like that. About 3 hours later, you're about as hungry as you've ever been in your entire life, and you just eat anything that isn't nailed down, because I think your body is now settled enough to recognize that it's actually has been deprived of nutrition. One of the other things about marathons that is important to consider if you're actually thinking about running a marathon is the time of day that the marathon is. A lot of marathons in smaller cities start really early in the morning. I ran one in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, many years ago, and it started at 6 a.m., which to me is a lot better time to start, because if you're going to run a 4-hour marathon and it starts at 6, you're basically going to be home by 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning. In New York City, because it's so big, the first runners don't actually start till after 9, and those are usually the elite and the professionals. So you could be starting at 10 or 10:30 in the morning. When you add 4 hours, so you get home, it's 4 o'clock. So you really haven't eaten a meal the entire day, and that's something
Mhm.
that I don't think a lot of uh, training regimens or marathon advisors talk enough about, is that given everything else that's going on and given the massive energy expenditure that you're going to do during the course of the marathon, the timing of it kind of sets you up for not eating for an entire day on a day when you're running 26 miles. So you need to be mindful of the hour of the day that the marathon is starting, and calculating uh, adding your marathon time and adding another hour on top of that until you're able to eat again. So you
So
may want to
location and
have,
time is critical.
yeah, right. If you're not going off until 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, you probably should be eating something fairly substantial at 7 a.m.
Mhm. Have you tried or have you heard about ketone esters? Has this
No, I
come
have
under
not.
your radar?
No.
So it's basically the idea is that you can get your energy from two main sources, fuel substrates, like we like to call it. One is a carbohydrate based fuel source, which you mentioned, the whole grains, the rice, the potatoes, the yams, things like that. And the other way you could do it is by burning free fatty acids in your liver. And this is what gave the this premise is what gave the birth to the ketogenic diet, which is is gone really high up in the trend, and everyone's been using it. Where it first was used for epilepsy, and now various fitness trainers, celebrities are using it. But but there is a way where you can what or what let me start explaining what ketone ester is. It's a sort of like I would call it a chemical, but you ingest that and it raises your blood level of ketones, just like you would have if you have been either fasting for 3 days. And ketones basically they have they have more energy per unit than carbohydrates, and they can fuel your cells up to 25% more. Now we're talking about brain cells, heart cells. That's why the ketogenic diet has got so famous. But I've been looking at protocols where if you could be fat adapted, which means that you're able to burn fat as a fuel source, because most of the people cannot. They've been using carbohydrates for a very long time. And then in your training, if you then combine carbohydrates along with some really good ketone esters, then your energy shoots up the roof, because now you
Mhm.
have two fuel sources simultaneously. And ketone esters is a simple drink. It doesn't even get digested because it goes straight to the liver. So you have this glycolytic energy stores from the carbohydrates, and then you have this ketone energy, which is good for your brain, and it make you last longer as well. So this is another really cool trick that they've been doing a lot of studies recently. Now the Tour de France, some of the cyclists have been using it. So it's starting to get more popular, that they sort of like make their body adapt to these two fuel sources. And you don't really use this ketone ester in your training much, but you use it on the day and you feel like enormous amounts of energy. So this is one thing that I've come across. And again, the other thing that you said, any fast digesting carbohydrates, the only thing for me, what I feel is that when we look at carbohydrates as well, there are various different kind of polysaccharides of carbohydrates. And when you look at fruits normally, what fruit does is the sugar or the fructose in fruits, when they get broken down, they go straight to the liver, and your liver can hold about 150 200 grams of carbohydrates, but it is your muscle that can hold about 500 to 600 grams of carbohydrates. And what happens is, when you're running or when you're in an intense activity, the first thing you burn up is your muscle glycogen stores, and only when that is completely depleted you go to the liver. So what I tell people is that if you're doing something really hectic, then using one of those fast gels like you mentioned, which have some more complex form of Vitago or something else that really goes to the muscle, rather than using a banana or an apple. Because a lot of times people will come up to me and ask me like, hey, I'm trying to do this all naturally, and I would love to, like, put a few bananas in my cycling ride or something. I'm like, you could do that, but then again, you go through the gastric distress problem, because your body at that time when you're performing, it's not really meant to digest any food. Your parasympathetic nervous system is shut down, and your sympathetic, which is your fight or flight, the adrenaline, cortisol, corticoid releasing hormones are switched up, and that inhibits digestion. So anyone who's listening and you want to go on a very long run or a ride, think of what Saul told you. Have all these gels, they can really help you out. But if you decided to like sit down, eat, or take a break, it might not be that great. So I'm happy that we address that for the people who might be thinking of getting into this. And so tell me this, Saul. Now, we already covered that you're not just a marathoner. You're doing so many different things, right? Advising people. You're working with Fortune 500. How do you manage your time and tasks at hand? Is there like some sort of a routine that you have, or so if anyone who's like listening to this and trust me, a lot of people around the world right now, the thing that they're really like struggling to manage is their time and this multitude of tasks that have been dumped on them. So I want to learn from you and like share with us like what's your hack or what's your secret, or what have you learned that keeps you up and running.
Yeah, I think the key word here is flexibility. Um,
Mhm.
I think you start with a schedule. Like, I'm gonna run in the morning, and I'm gonna do weight training in the afternoon, and I'm gonna do some stretching at night. That's your plan A, right? And then you have to be ready that plan
And
A
then
is
life
going to
comes
go
along.
out the window. Right, plan A is going to go out the window, you know, more times than not, and you're going to have to find not only a plan B but a plan C, D, and E. So um, I think it's really having a mindset of I'm going to find time to do this whenever it presents itself. So, and that's going to be different at different times of your life and different times of the
Mhm.
year. If it's holiday season, you have family obligations. It's going to be then, say, in the middle of summer when people are not around and you have the days are longer and you have more time for yourself. So I think that if you're a person who says, I can't work out in the morning, I can only work out at night, I think it's going to be more difficult to sustain that over a long period of time because not every night is going to present itself as an opportunity. The morning is going to have to do it, and vice versa, obviously. So for me, I went from trying to squeeze runs in before my kids would get up when they were little, so that I would be there when they would get up. So I would, go out really early in the morning to, the point now where it's mostly work obligations that would interfere with training. So I have gone to the gym at 11 o'clock in the morning and 11 o'clock at night. So sometimes you have to just go with what the obstacles are in front of you and figure out a way to find it. And some days you're not going to achieve it, and you can't get stuck on that. I had a long run planned for yesterday and I just couldn't get it in. So instead of having the attitude of, well, that sucks and now I'm sort of back to square one, it's like, okay, today's another day. What could I do today that's going to get me to where I need to be? So flexibility, adaptability, and recognizing that there are going to be tough times where you're not going to be able to achieve everything you want, but as long as you stay connected to it, that's been really my experience, is that if you can stay connected. So if you were planning a 10-mile run, you only got a 3-mile run, and that's better than nothing. If you were going to do weight training 3 times a week, you can only do it, and that's better than nothing. You stay connected so that when the time presents itself, you can take advantage of it. That's been my philosophy over the last many decades.
Thank you for sharing that. And one of the key messages that I got from this is, and this is especially for people who are listening and you might be very hard on yourself, what Saul just described is something called as common humanity. Now, it is not just that these things might be happening to Saul or to me or to you who is listening. It happens to everyone. This is how life is. This is that one thing that keeps us all connected. We have issues. There are days that are great. There are days that are not. Days that we might feel miserable, but there are days that we might feel great. And as long as you recognize that this is not something as long as you don't get that victim mentality and you get more of the victor mentality and you say, okay, you know what? Things went wrong. I couldn't do it. Maybe you ate some, maybe some French fries or you did something, but don't hold yourself I mean, don't hold yourself for so long. Just think about, be connected. Think about it that this happens to everyone. It's not life or that. The sun's gonna be another day, and as long as, completely agree with Saul, as long as you connected to that self of yours, whether you have like a specific or a determination, and Saul, a very good strategy, by the way, which is, a 10-mile run, you couldn't do it, maybe a 3-mile run. If you couldn't 3-mile run, maybe a walk around the street. As long as move, and a lot of neuroscience tell you this, instead of having an all or nothing mentality, if you make your brain is more like, let's say you get more of this motivation high dopamine release in your brain when you take a step forward. So anyhow, if you could do like 10 burpees or like some, or go for a walk in the afternoon and you wouldn't have done that, that's going to dump a lot of these good neurochemicals in your brain and it's going to make you feel great about yourself. And another advice that I would like to always give people in situations like this is that we're we're conditioned to look at life at its ultimate form, like big thing, the next big marathon, the weight that you had to achieve, how many calories you had to cut. But life doesn't operate that way. Life operates, from an atom to a molecule, to it goes like that. So when you want to look at things, look at the smallest things, a pat on the back, or like I like to say, celebrate your small wins. You could say no to that cheesecake. Wow, that's good. Give yourself a pat on the back, and this will by itself make you more happier in life, and make you move towards the next best thing. But then also, Saul, every time, I mean, I've been training for years. I meet people all the time who've been training in different sports, and I know, like, I don't call myself an athlete anymore, but like an ex-athlete, I know that there are times that you have to sacrifice, right? Sometimes
Mhm.
it's going to a late night party, or drinking a few drinks, or just having this thing that you have to say no. Even it could even be for the movies, so that you could wake up in the morning early, or train better, or have some sort of a discipline. But this thing can also take you away from things like your loved ones. Like, you might prefer going on a run than spending time with your kids or your wife, or picking up your skills kids from school. So when we talk about long term, and you're the perfect person to talk about this, because you've done this big long term strategy and you've been doing this for a while. How do you manage, or how do you balance between some things that you have to say no to, but which are also important, and your training? Is the key flexibility, or there's something else?
Well, I think listening to that question, the thing that occurs to me is that you have to think about what your motivation around all of this is, right? If your motivation is to look muscular and to look like an athlete, and that's your motivation, that's going to be very different than if your motivation is I want to be healthy as possible. So I think that if your motivation is the latter, that you want to be active and healthy for as long as possible, everything has to flow through that. So that means that yes, I want to be fit, but for what purpose, right? If the purpose is so that you could enjoy the rest of your life, that you could, play with your uh, grandchildren potentially when you're in your 70s, and not be sedentary at that point, then um, it brings more of a balance to it, right? That if it's all about you, and it's about how you look, and about what accomplishments you have in fitness, then you're going to be less flexible about the rest of your life, and you're actually going to be missing out on a lot of life that you could have been enjoying. So I think when you come to fitness from a motivation of I'm doing this to promote my health, I'm doing this so that I can be active and make choices about what activities I want to undertake for as long as possible, then you look at it as this is all for everyone else, right? I'm not doing this just for me. I'm doing this for everyone else in my life, so that I can be with them in a active and positive way for as long as possible. And that brings you actually closer to the people that matter in your life and not further away.
So it's the
So I
classic
think
looking
I
at.
think it's a right. It's a
Yeah.
challenge for everybody because there's a certain amount of selfishness, frankly, that's involved in being that dedicated to a fitness routine, because you do have to shut
And
out
ego.
other things, and ego, right? And but yeah, I think you have to always bring it back to what is the ultimate goal here? Is the ultimate goal here so that you look good in your bathing suit, or that you look good in a photograph, or that you could be on the cover of a magazine? Probably that should not be your motivation. If it is, that's probably not going to be sustainable over a long period of time. But if your motivation is, as I said, to be an active participant in many aspects of your life, work, family, friends, and that fitness is a way of achieving that, then I think you become a little less selfish and a little more flexible and understanding that it's all part of the same package, right? We're all here for a limited amount of time, and the workout in and of itself, that's actually a means to an end, the end being an active and healthy life.
Yep, exactly. Completely agree. Especially the last part that you said about means versus ends. So most of the times we have these different goals. One is a means goal, like, say, I would say, like, oh, if I could run 10 miles every day, or like 15 miles in every week. And that would be a means goal, right? That's means to getting something. But my end goal should be, oh, I want to do this because that's going to make me feel more confident, make me feel more happy. And every time you know how to distinguish from your means goal, and anything else could make you happy, right? Spending time with your friends can make you happy, going drinking and going crazy can make you happy. But then what's your end goal? Why are you doing that? So you could employ all these small strategies, whether it's a run, whether it's a good dinner, whether it's, reading for an hour every day. These all are going to be your mean goals, and then your end goal is ultimately going to be like that happiness, satisfaction. And every time one of those mean goals don't work, just look at your end goal, because you are hitting the right things in other aspects of your life that will get you to the end goal. And I think sometimes we get too narrow focused and we're like, oh, it's the means goal, and we cannot think anymore, and we get angry or frustrated. So if you're listening to this, you know look at your end goal. And now you also spoke about struggle, and the one thing that came into my mind is that people these days, they're facing a lot of craziness right around the world. Now there's economic downturns, inflation is a big one that we're suffering now in UAE quite a lot, and all over the world, I'm sure. There's workplace stress. There's then we add something else. Now all of these things are mentally draining, and then we add the stress of overtraining and under recovery, and this increases the whole allostatic load. And when you look at like athletes like who are super enthusiastic type A type of athletes, they always use their body so much that they can get into this overusage of overuse of like certain ligaments or tendons, and they push it too much. So how do you like avoid that kind of like a burnout? Because now you're not just your workout by itself is like crazy, and then you have all these other factors like things that are out of your control, and that does increase your overall load. So how do you sort of like get around that?
I think it's a process um, of building a process of building strength over time, and by that I mean that um, if you're just starting a fitness routine, you have to again take the long view of it. That you can't think of, I want to be able to achieve X in a short period of time, and I'm going to make sacrifices to get there. I think that you should always start with very modest goals and then add incrementally. So if I look at where I was, 25 or 30 years ago, basically I was just running. That was probably all I was doing. And then I kept adding on that onto that with weight training, with flexibility training, with cross training, with some of the physical therapy type of modalities that I was mentioning that I started doing for my knee. And so you start adding on to these things and your body adapts, and you have to be conscious of when it's achieved, adapt to it, and not adding it before your body is ready to accept it. So I think that um, over the course of many years, you could train your body to withstand a fair amount of stress if you introduce that to your body in a way that
Mm.
that it can respond to it. So a great example of that for me was several years ago. My kid. It was during the summer. My kids were away. My wife went to meet one of them overseas for a couple of weeks, and I was thinking, wow, I have 2 weeks where I'm going to be alone. I know there are not a lot of demands at work during this time of year. I'm just going to like work out, like like all the things that I've always wanted to do. I'm just going to do it for this 2 weeks, and it's going to be awesome. And you know what actually happened was that after about 2 days, it was like I feel really not great because I've started doing more than I ever did before, and this is actually not that much fun because my motivation was like just start adding stuff on without really a reason other than it seemed like I could do it. And that wasn't motivation enough. So it landed up that over the course of 2 weeks, I kind of was doing what I've always done, maybe a little more, but not a lot more. So the idea that you need to, shock your body into stress so that it can, bounce back and respond is not one that I subscribe to. I subscribe more to you should find your level of adaptation to the stress. And when your body seems to be able to sustain it, then you find incremental amounts of additional stress that your body can adapt to. And over the course of many years, you'll have found that now you're doing a lot, and your body seems to be responding to it without breaking down. Into those breakdowns, whether it's a pulled hamstring or aching knees or a back that's sore, that's telling you something about either you're adding too much or you're not taking care of some part of your body, and those things really need to be listened to very carefully.
I love it. I love it. Again, this is the classic example of the process of hormesis, where the poison is in the dose, where you can have a little bit of poison. Well, we're not literally meaning poison, but like a little bit of stress every day, and after a certain period of time, you're immune to that kind of stress. And that is the same way, guys. I remember, so I never loved running so much, but like I was super bored, so I was like, let me change things up. This is about like 8 or 10 years, and at that time, wireless headphones were the new big thing. So that we got that first set of wireless headphones, and when you're running, it's just so easy because you could put the iPhone or the iPad in your arm. And I was so excited. I was like, okay, let me get one of these. And to my surprise, I thought I was a good athlete. I was training a lot, but I never was running. If I ran, I was like running 2 or 3 kilometers max. And I started running, and for the first time, I could run and not worry about the wires being stuck. And I could download my entire playlist and just listen to it wirelessly. So I got into the motivation. I was like, all right, I've just done 3 kilometers. Let me do five. And then five came. And I was like, let me do eight. And long story short, by the end of all of this, I managed to do 20 kilometers. It was really hard. I had to put, and I've never ran, I had to put all of these things. But at the end of 20 kilometers, I had to call up my friends to pick me up because I couldn't stand. And for days, it was, because I just went and I thought it was going to be 3 kilometers. And then there's just this music went up. We were listening to high beats, and I pushed myself way too much. And that's a classical example of what you shouldn't be doing. Everyone who's listening, you know, do 3 kilometer, do 4 next week, do 5, give your body enough time to recover. And talking about recovery, are you using any sort of like biohacks or gadgets or something else to like, you know, upregulate your performance in some way? Are you a fan of those kind of things?
Now, I try to keep things really simple, um, and by that I mean I look for the lowest tech way of achieving what I'm trying to achieve,
Mhm. Got it.
because just for me, the more complicated things become, the less I'm able to sustain it. So, things that are complicated, things that are time consuming to prepare, like my son at one point, the one who's running the marathon with me, was really into weightlifting a few years ago. And at one point he said to me that I spend more time preparing to get to the gym than I do in the gym, that
Yeah.
I have all of the, an hour and a half before I have to do the thing, and then 40 minutes before I have to do another supplement, and then I have to, do a pre-workout thing, and then by the time I get to the gym, it's 3 hours later. So, I'm so sensitive about time management that,
Mhm.
anything that takes longer than it should, or that requires a lot of preparation or is expensive, are things that I could, find a simple way. And one of the things that I'm a big advocate of is that, and this comes out in popular culture in a lot of different ways, but I have a particular view on it, which is that, you know, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, our ancestors, didn't have sedentary lifestyles, and they didn't have things delivered to their door that they could then eat. They basically had to expend energy to sustain themselves. And while their life expectancy was a lot shorter, I think there are a lot of things that we could learn from them, which is that the human body was was built or has evolved, if that's your from a perspective of that we can be very active and that we can, lift heavy things and walk or run long distances because that's how our race, the human race, so that, and none of that was done with technology or with medical science. Now that we have the benefit of technology and medical science, we can do it in ways that are, smarter or more efficient. But
Right.
that, ultimately, though, our bodies are sort of good to go. Like they're, we all come out of the womb unless we have, unfortunately, some kind of genetic disease or some kind of chronic condition. Most of us are built to be active, and that we don't need a lot of technology around that. And technology can be helpful, but I find that a lot of times people um, have an over reliance on technology uh, and complicated science. And that may work for some people. For me, I like to keep things super simple.
That's good to know. Thank you for sharing that. And while you were saying this, one of the things that, building up on this whole ancestral way of living and how we were not designed to sit in like a cubicle and watch our, uh, phones with our necks down and putting all this cervical spine pressure. We're made to move around, do things, but in the modern environment, like I think 90% of us don't even get outdoor like enough light that is meant to be, and that again impacts our circadian biology and so many other things. But most of the times when people tell me like, hey man, I've got a desk job and I want to go out and do much, but either I have to commute a long time or something or the other. People
Mm-hmm.
have all their limitations. Like in a country like UAE, even if you want to go out, it's maybe 110 Fahrenheit or more. Like, so it is damn hot. We can't even try to do it in a day because you'll faint. But what I like to tell people, I'd love to hear your take about it. I actually found this from University of Chester, and what they found out was if you're standing for about like let's say instead of sitting down, if you're standing, your heartbeat increases by 10 beats per minute. And now anyone who's listening must be like, oh, 10 beats per minute is not that much. But then that kind of like 10 beats per minute burns about a 50 calories, extra 50 calories per hour. And then if you could, like right now I'm standing, this whole workstation is on a standing desk. Then if you, let's say, even if you stand half of your average day at work, that would give you another 150 calories that you burn. And let's say if you go to work 5 days a week, you're burning 750 calories. That's 3,000 calories per month. And then you look at the grand total of things, that comes up to 36,000 calories. Now someone would tell me like, hey, we don't work all throughout the year, so even if you want to take a month or 2 months off for the vacations and Christmas and holidays, and if you want to just do that math for 10 months, it comes up to 30,000 calories. And that's, if now just because we're on the marathon topic, it's 30,000 calories would be approximately running not two or three, but like 10 marathons a year. And that would be like 8 pounds of fat or more. So, there are sometimes I tell people like, just like you, just do the simple things. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of tech, and I'm also starting a company, an anti-aging company with all this tech and things involved. But for me, my mantra is the same like yours. Like, I feel if something disrupts your time, even an extra minute or two from what you were supposed to do, the return on investment isn't very much. Because if you had to set up a machine and tie it and do all of these things, and you were not able to stack it with other things, for me, I'm a big fan of this. If I could do something and stack it with something that I'm already doing, yeah, it could run on in the background. It doesn't hurt me so much. But I kill three birds or four birds with the same stone. But anyway, we're coming to the end of this conversation now. And really quick, I want to get your, because this show is more about biohacking and, sort of like uh, getting to the shortcuts and understanding like what can really move the needle. Tell me in the shortest way possible your one hack around fear.
Fear.
Yeah.
I think you have to always look at where is that fear coming from.
Okay.
Is that fear based on some old story, like you as a kid there was something traumatic about the thing you're
Hmm.
looking at, or is there an actual threat to you at the moment?
Okay.
Where is it coming from?
Okay. So fear, where does it come from? What about doubt?
I think doubt is actually a good thing, and you should listen to the doubt um, and try to understand where it's coming from and what it's telling you. And sometimes you have to succumb to the doubt that maybe this is not a good idea. Maybe the doubt is well placed.
Okay. What about uncertainty?
I think you have to turn towards the certainty when things okay, 9 things are going on, 7 of them I don't know how they're going to turn out, but 2 of them I do. So let's focus on the things that I can control and the things that I know where they're going to go, and the other parts will take them as they come.
Okay. What about anxiety and worry?
I think that um, it's also could be motivating, that you shouldn't necessarily look at it as this thing that you have to stop, that you want to suppress it. Just yelling at yourself like don't be anxious, like, well, maybe I need to modify some things if my mind is telling my body is telling me that there's anxiety around it. Maybe this is something that I need to take into consideration and listen to it.
Okay. Interesting. Okay. And my last question to you is, if you had a time machine and you could go back to your younger self, choose any age, like let's say on an average, like your 30s. So you have a son who's 31 years old. So let's say if you could go back to that age and you could give yourself one piece of advice. Now it could be about it doesn't have to be specifically about running or being wearing all these multiple hats, but it could be about anything in life. What would be that one thing be that you would go back and tell yourself?
Yeah, I think that one is an easy one for me because I think that I have only in the last 10 years or so come to understand the importance of making good human connections. That you need to find people that motivate you, that inspire you, that seem to be doing things that you want to do, and make really strong connections with those people so that you can become part of their world and they can introduce you to other people who are part of that world. I didn't fully appreciate that until I saw how important those human connections can be.
And it's also one thing that you alluded to before is about having that community aspect, because when you're looking at the grand scheme of things, this might be a lousy example, but like you take a few cells in the petri dish, and when you isolate the cell 9 times out of 10 they'll start dying. When you take an animal in the wild and you take it away from its group or tribe or pack, that that lone wolf or whoever, that thing will not survive or be as happy as the others in the pack. And us humans, we're also conditioned by the same thing. We're conditioned by a few f words. The first one is fear. We're scared of, I mean, if you've got to be fearful of something to not be like eaten by them or taken over by them, so you've got to have your fear, your sympathetic nervous system on. The second thing is fight. If there comes a time you have to be able to fight, where this is not physical fighting but like anything that you need to fight to survive, so you've got to be fearful to survive. You've got to fight to survive. Next thing is, which is crazy, but it is fertility. You have to be able to reproduce, to pass on the genes, pass on your legacy, pass on, because in a natural environment, any species that is not able to reproduce naturally doesn't live for long, because nature wants us to procreate and wants us to always, that's us being more useful for this whole cycle. And the last thing, which a lot of people don't focus on, is the last F word, which is friends. Because you see it in ant community, the smallest creature in the world, the ants, they work in a community. You see it in big species, and you see this, that one of the biggest secrets to anti-age and increase your longevity is to be among a certain group of people, like you said, close network people, trust in them, love in them, share things with them. And you will see this across a lot of blue zones, which are these geographical areas in the world where people are living an extraordinary life. The one most important thing, even if they're smoking and drinking or not, they're usually active, but if they're not active, the sense of community and love and dependency that someone is there in their life just makes them live longer. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think that whole community aspect is something that we might be running away from right now because of this whole technology, and everyone's just been chatting and texting. It's a nice thing. It's like you said, technology can be really good, but there are also other ways you should make meaningful connections. So I am so grateful for you to come to the show today. I really appreciate all that you've been doing, every kind, all your multiple hats. I still don't know how you juggle them, but like you've been doing a great job, and you're a speaker, you're an author. If someone wanted to get in touch with you or like learn more about you, do you have a website or something that people can go to?
Yeah, well,
Or
I don't have a personal website, but my
Mhm,
if you Google my name, Saul Finkelstein, and if you add New York lawyer, you'll come up with my firm's website,
mhm.
and so in there you could all my contact information is there. So uh, I think if you Google my name, New York lawyer, it's the first hit you'll see. And I just want to
Okay,
say to you that I've learned a lot from you today. You bring
thank you.
an interesting perspective and have me already thinking about things a little differently than I did an hour ago.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to share your energy and your space. And this is me, everyone, CJ. This is your host signing out from the Shift with CJ podcast. Everyone, have a great day, a great week, a great month, a great lifetime, and see you in the next episode.